Just a heads up that at the end of today's video, we'll be reading through the lesson summary since today officially marks the end of chapter 10. Have you ever had to tolerate something or someone, or have you ever tried to coerce someone into doing something for you? Why am I bringing these up and what do these words even mean? The reason is because we're going to be learning today about what Great Britain did in response to the Boston Tea Party. According to dictionary.com, the word tolerate means to allow the existence, presence, practice, or act of without prohibition or hindrance. Or in much, much simpler terms, to put up with something. And for coerce, its definition reads as to dominate or control, especially by exploiting fear, anxiety, etc. That doesn't sound great, and that's exactly what Great Britain wanted.
After the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed several laws called the Coercive Acts. The British wanted to coerce or force the colonies to obey Great Britain. Many colonists said that they could not tolerate or accept these harsh laws. The colonists called these laws the Intolerable Acts.
As with almost everything in life, everybody has their unique perspective on things. For Great Britain, they wanted these acts to scare the colonists straight and to remember who's in charge. For the colonists, though, they saw these rules as completely unfair. And we know that these guys don't give up easy when an unfavorable law is passed. And you would think Great Britain got the hint after the Tea Party. But they didn't, and they continued coming down hard on the colonists.
One law, the Boston Port Act, closed Boston Harbor. Trade ships could not enter or leave the harbor until Boston paid for the lost tea. Many workers lost their jobs and people feared that the citizens of Boston would starve.
Essentially what's happening here is that Great Britain is severely limiting what the colonists can and cannot do. We sometimes call this an overcorrection, which means when you do something wrong, to fix it, you try and do the exact opposite of what you did in the first place, but you often get messy results. This is sort of what Great Britain is trying to do. At this point, they've lost so much control of the colonies that instead of trying to come up with a peaceful solution that might include some freedom and independence on the colonist part, they've instead tightened their grip. Notice right now that Parliament is focusing just on the city of Boston and not so much with the other colonies. Their hope was that if they could control one of the major cities using fear as a motivator, then perhaps maybe the smaller cities and colonies might realize who really is boss. But in fact, this scare tactic did literally the exact opposite of what they were going for.
The other colonies helped by sending money, food, and supplies to Boston. In addition, in September 1774, the First Continental Congress was held, and leaders from every colony except Georgia met in Philadelphia. They discussed their complaints about Great Britain. The angry delegates agreed to fight against the Boston Port Act and the other Intolerable Acts.
So not only do you have all the colonies coming together to support one of their own, but you have literally all of the colonies except one coming together in a place to decide what to do about these injustices in an event called the First Continental Congress. Georgia was a little hesitant to join because they were prospering so well under British rule. The First Continental Congress was an enormous milestone for the colonists. For the first time, they felt united as a group of people. They knew from first-hand experience what taxation without representation felt like, and so they made sure that when they met as a group, they included every single colony possible so that everyone's voice could be heard. At this meeting, they discussed how they would let Parliament and King George know how they were feeling about all these rules. Remember that way back when, people first left Great Britain to go to the New World to seek out freedoms that the government wouldn't let them have. So this entire, almost a country land is filled with people who feel very strongly about standing up for freedom. And now you have the original threat back again trying to pull them back in. So obviously the colonists are going to fight back. You might think that Parliament and King George would know this is happening, but the phrase blinded by power is currently being applied here. And Great Britain is desperate to regain control by any means necessary. It just so happens that these means aren't the best strategy to deal with these colonists, which means we've officially reached the boiling point between Great Britain and the colonies. And let me tell you, the next couple of chapters are going to be nuts. Before we read the lesson summary for chapter 10, let's finish filling in our notes for the Intolerable Acts and how it compares to our modern day example. To sum everything up, first your class was arguing with another class about who could play where. Then the principal sends the yard duties to watch over you and isolate you at the basketball courts. Not happy about this, you start arguing with the yard duties and the principal punishes you for it. Then on top of that, you're only allowed to buy one kind of juice from the snack shack and you respond to this by throwing this juice away. So now your principal is really upset and declares that you can only stay in your classroom during recess. And this is what the Intolerable Acts were. In your notes, this translates to Great Britain punishes the colonists with several harsh laws such as the Boston Port Act. And remember, this Port Act prevented any ships to go into or out of the Boston Harbor. And you think our social distancing is bad. Eventually your class is just fed up with all of this and they decide to hold a meeting to figure out what to do next. In the same way, the First Continental Congress fights against the Intolerable Acts, or as Great Britain called them, the Coercive Acts. And well, hey, look at that. We are finally finished with chapter 10. Before we end today's video, let's read through the lesson summary to wrap everything up. I'll put the text up on the screen for you.
In this lesson, you learned about some of the events from 1754 to the end of 1774 that created tension tension between the colonies and Great Britain. During these years, Great Britain passed a number of acts, including the Quartering Act and Stamp Act, which required the colonists to pay taxes. However, these acts upset the colonists because they had no say in making the laws. Colonists protested to show their anger. They boycotted goods and sometimes would start fights with British soldiers. When Parliament passed the Tea Act, the colonists protested again. A group of men dressed as American Indians boarded ships and dumped tea into the Boston harbor. In response, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, or the Intolerable Acts. By 1775, people on both sides were very angry. Some people used the metaphor of a parent and child to describe the relationship between Great Britain and the colonies. Like a parent, Great Britain created the colonies and thought that they should follow its laws. Like growing children, the colonies wanted a greater role in making decisions.
Guys, that's going to officially do it for today's daily dose of history and the weekly dose of Chapter 10. I want to give you guys a couple heads up about a few things happening later this week. Yesterday, on Tuesday, I sent each of your classes their own individual invitation for our Zoom meeting to review for this test. Be sure to check your emails for this invitation, but just in case, I'm going to be sending it out again on Thursday morning before your meeting starts. Here are your times so you know exactly when to log on. And remember, come with questions so we can make the most of this meeting so that we are best prepared for this test on Friday. And speaking of tests, make sure to check out the Google Classroom on Friday morning, as that is where the test will be. Thank you so much for tuning into these videos over the last week and a half. I've loved making them for you, and I hope you've enjoyed watching them, and more importantly, you've learned something from them. So that's it for me, but I'll see you on Zoom right here tomorrow.